Peace. Shalom. Back again with chapter 18 of the rule from Orion. There is in every lunatic a misunderstood genius whose idea, shining in his head, frightened people, and for whom delirium was the only solution to the strangulation that life had prepared for him. Van Gogh, the man suicide by society. Antonian Artaud, 1947. Numb, we sat in our garden of silence without consolation, two souls, two disturbed truth seekers. I imagined that hell was similar to the poet Frederick Holderlin's abyss, abound in all fathoming, seething with life from lytic viral production. It seemed that the free rhythms of his works were tragic hymns written calmly and courageously to stave off his madness, his thoughts of death and the abyss. Modern psychologists have diagnosed Holderlin's madness as acute schizophrenia with bouts of manic depression. But medical documents during his time are fuzzy, claiming that he suffered from Troriga, Sustan, Zeratung, and Umanaktung. Translated, that is sad condition, confusion, benightedness. One could say that he was overcome by the darkness of night, by melancholy, by hopelessness, by the same despair that haunted Nietzsche and others. John had moved his chair into the sunlight. He looked sad, but he must have been thinking of the many creative artists who have gone mad in their quest for truth, the ones who could not find strength in wisdom, the ones who saw insanity as a way out of an intolerable world. These madmen were not to be blamed, for they were culturally bound by the abyss of modern fragmented thinking. Take psychology, for instance. About 1906, the Swiss psychologist guru Carl Jung claimed that one of his schizophrenic patients saw a penis hanging from the sun and that it moved to produce the wind. Jung was confused as to the meaning of this odd mental picture, but interested in mythology, he discovered a pre-Christian Mithric religious reference about the wind originating from a tube hanging from the center of the sun. From this, Jung theorized that since the patient knew nothing of this myth, that the image must have come from the shared human heritage of ancient residues buried deep in our consciousness, unconscious, what he called the collective unconscious. Jung believed his method could correctly diagnose psychological symptoms from fantasies interpreted in lines with mythical images. At the same time he was treating his penis patient, he diagnosed an American woman as schizophrenic by the same method, had her admitted to a nut house, but she was released within a week with no symptoms of schizophrenia. Jung had made a mistake. Certainly, there were mystical images in the hallucinations of the insane. But is this cause for incarceration? What if Jung had explained to his penis patient that his hallucination represented a solar flux tube or a coronal mass ejection of plasma, which actually does produce the solar wind? But Jung could not explain the possibility to the patient because he had no imaginative capacity to see a coronal mass ejection as a penis. To be fair to Jung, his knowledge about the operation of the sun was not available in 1905, or this knowledge. But it is available today in the young science of space physics, which few psychologists study because our sciences are split, fragmented, packaged into a neat schizoid discipline. Multiple personalities attempting to see parts of truth, but not the whole. Today's systematic Western clinicals or clinicians have the diagnostic and statistical manual of a mental disorders that allow them to easily diagnose clients. The disorders are classified and subclassified with diagnostic criteria placed in compact gray boxes. Even though modern psychologists do not understand the meaning of their patients' hallucinations, they can still classify, label, diagnose the client as mentally ill. What is worse is that the patient believes the clinicians are right, so they live demented, tormented lives, justified as they are by the clinicians' diagnosis that they are crazy, schizophrenic, mad. But not all patients are believers. The madman philosopher Antonian Artaud spent 9 years in insane asylums. His persistent delusions, auditory hallucinations, glossolalia, and violent tantrums rewarded him with repeated electroshock treatments during his final 3 years of captivity. Artaud was not suicidal, but he said that each confrontation with his psychiatrist made him want to hang himself because he could not cut the physician's throat. Of course, physicians can vary their diagnoses for schizophrenia. There is the disorganized type, the catatonic type, the paranoid type, and the undifferentiated type. But why label humans on the weak base of diagnostic criteria mired in misinformation and based on a language disassociated from meaning? The real problem is that clinicians cannot understand how the imaginative insane can see these mental pictures that define truth and knowledge. To the clinician, the individual has lost ego boundaries or the sense of self. When the person is perplexed about identity and the meaning of existence and has the insight, not delusion, to sense control by an outside force such as nature. Because psychiatric frowns on spiritual quests, psychiatrists see the genius of the artist as a threatening monster that must be restrained, deadened, electrocuted. Take the French surrealist winter writer Gerard de Nerval, whose physician advised him to document his madness in a book. Nerval then wrote Aurelia, a story about the delights of imagination, dream, and his vision of a golden goddess and her radiant orchid paradise. He believed dreams open up the spirit world. In one of his dreamlike voyages, He explained how he was carried along a current of molten metal whose streams were chemicals that crisscrossed the world. Nerval described this as a transparent network which covers the world and stretches by degrees to the planets and stars. Actually, this is a pretty accurate description of the Earth's magnetosphere, an energy structure with loops of crisscross magnetic field lines and currents. In his last account, Nerval wrote that these currents were composed of living souls in a molecular condition and that he was traveling by them too fast to see who they were. Likewise, magnetic field lines have ions frozen on them like beads on a rosary, like nucleotides on a DNA molecule. Chemicals are composed of atoms, and space abound of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, iron atoms, and molecular blends, even amino acids, the foundation of matter. Nerval's awareness also suggests that his serpent that encircles the earth is none other than the real ring current around our planet, the Van Allen belts. Finally, he sensed his own spiritual strife deeply and described his plight as sliding on a tightrope of infinite length. Nerval believed that we acted out our own destinies on earth where we were captive because the electromagnetism of our body is forced in a direction imposed on it by laws. Our ills related to an error in the general combination of numbers. We have been cut in 1,000 pieces, and the races are losing strength and perfection. We have completely misunderstood the secret of life. Information has been falsified to keep us ignorant. We are immortal. We have a double. A molecule is a group of souls, and death ultimately devours everyone, whether you have been good or bad. Thoughts plague me like flights of ideas, like blackbirds circling a wheat field. I remember that Nerval hung himself from an apron string, his pockets stuffed with the last page of Aurelia, where he wrote that he would fix his dream state and use his willpower to dominate his sensations instead of being controlled by them. After all, he believed that the microcosm is simply the image of the macrocosm in one's heart. Perhaps Aurelia was the Egyptian mother goddess Isis, for in 1843, 12 years before his conscious suicide, Nerval journeyed east to Egypt, Cairo, Alexandria, the pyramids. Nerval, intelligence, brilliante, active, luminous, in search of has hish, adventure, the occult, the bizarre, and the mystic eternal female, was later reduced and sentenced to a Freudian interpretation, childhood identity problems, a mother fixation, sadomasochistic, abalance, sexual incompetence, homosexuality inclinations, no, homosexual inclinations rather. Still, even Antonian Artaud believed a physical suicide like Nerval was not the answer because we were already dead. We already suicided by living dead in the world. So Artaud offered an alternative, an anterior suicide, or retracing our steps to the other side of existence, not to the side of death. I imagine Artaud's option as a movement across the tightrope to the Overman, the new cosmic species, the final stage of human evolution. What is really needed is an understanding of the meaning of the vision, the meaning of the hallucination itself, along with an understanding of ancient symbols. Jung, despite some mistakes, was on the right track with his method of active imagination. This healing function to restore the unconscious meaning of the symbols could also restore a healthy balance of both the psyches of the patients and the psychologists. Practical treatment would be the person's own insight into the process. To be healed, the person would try to understand the deep unconscious meanings of the mental pictures, the symbols, the bizarre hallucinations, the confused diagnostic criteria. For example, one would have to consider the actual meaning of the sensation of slowed time, social withdrawal, eccentric behavior, magical thinking, precursory delusions. It is not true that the major clinical diagnoses rotate like a monstrous galaxy around one central symptom. Is not that symptom the black hole of human sadness anchored to the nature's cold indifference and our own inability to unmask truth, to see the jester for what he is? My manner of thinking caused me to feel like one of Holderlin's bees, drunken and maddened to a frenzy and burned by the light of too many spring scents. But what I smelled was not a spring scent. It was the putrid stench of a cultural lobotomizing man, sentencing man to death by mediocrity. Yet, like a madman attracted to the light that punishes the moth, I too wanted to know the unconscious meaning of the symbols, and it was then I realized why Quixote called me Psyche, for I was forced to love in the dark without seeing the face of the lover, the face of truth, because Western culture and nature had dangerous boundaries and laws that safeguarded ignorance. Remembering the man from La Mancha, I suddenly understood his intent. He was trying to explain the meaning of ancient symbols, as was Lucia. They were trying to restore the fractured consciousness of humanity by connecting images and languages to meaning. Both Quixote and Lucia knew the symbolic code and were attempting to explain it. They were dissecting the heart of a nature and the corpse of culture. All right, that brings us at the end of chapter 18. Next time we get at it again, my peoples, will be on chapter 19. Again, I say peace. Shalom. See you next time.